I am joined by a man that I have never met before, John McKeever.
Nice to meet you.
But yes, no, I think, am I saying that right? John McKeever?
Yes.
No.
That's how some people say it. I'll let you go with that.
I've actually known you for 20 years before BrandActive, before Endeavor, when you were Gelb.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'd love to know the evolution of where you've been into where Endeavor is now and where you're going. I think is just a great story. So if you can sort of just summarize where you're at and where you're going,
sure,
that would be great.
I was fortunate when I graduated from business school to get a job with Gelb Consulting, which was a market research firm, actually one of Houston's first market research firms, founded in 1965 by Gabe Gelb. Mm-hmm. And so out of that came my ambition to build a national healthcare practice and to focus more of our work on research-based marketing strategy than just market research. Mm-hmm. And so historically, Gelb had done the very first patient satisfaction study for organizations like Memorial Hermann, but we also did a variety of different things for law firms, for an association for building managers. We were basically a generalist, but in terms of market research. So to me, strategy is about choosing what not to do. And so part of that was making some choices around industrial areas of focus, one of which was healthcare, and the other one being in Houston, you have to be in the energy industry. Right. Yeah. So, and I'm grateful for all the work that we've gotten there. So as the years progressed, so did our national prominence. And so I was just telling one of your colleagues earlier, probably one of the biggest threads that we had in building a national stature was an article that I wrote back in the early 2000s around experience management, and specifically a technique called experience mapping. And at the time, no one was talking about experience mapping. Right. And this was a way to put into context the entire journey that a consumer goes through that starts well beyond the four walls of a hospital. Mm-hmm. And that actually launched our national platform. We brought on clients like Freighter, who's still a client in Wisconsin, University of Michigan, Duke, BJC Healthcare. We were fortunate to have a number of these different assignments where we went in and actually looked at the functional and emotional needs of patients, and then helped organizations to translate those into actions around the expected behaviors, operations, as well as brand.
Yeah. I always found that work fascinating, by the way.
Yeah. And we still do it. I think it's been an amazing journey. To us, it has a very high impact in terms of the type of care delivered to patients. And then over a series of years, we grew into what is now Endeavor Management. So as a consequence, primarily of our strong healthcare base, Endeavor approached us for a merger. And Endeavor's depth was in oil and gas, but mainly around change management. Mm-hmm. Change management and culture, executive coaching, those types of things. Okay. And so with the merger with Endeavor, we actually were able to solidify our position working at the intersection of brand, which we know, and of course we share with you, operations, which we also share with you, and then culture. Yeah. And so brand operations and culture is really where we do a lot of our work. And so fast forward now to 10 years post our Endeavor merger, we actually this week just launched a new company, Endeavor Analytics, which is based on Correlate IQ, which is an AWS-based platform where we're able to integrate social determinants of health data across a variety of different platforms. Yeah. So as a firm now, we're about 350 people in size. We're ranked one of the top 25 healthcare management consultancies in the country. And so it's been a tremendous journey, along this time period.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've had the chance to work on, a couple projects together, a couple few at this point over the years, which is great. And I think we've always stayed massively complementary, right? When you were focused on research and experience, right, we're still helping build the business case around the changes that people need to make, right? When you've moved more into, at various times, brand strategy and creative, right? We stay super complementary because we deal with the implementation of all of that and none of the, development or execution or research or strategy around all of that. As you move into more AOR execution, right?
Right.
Again, there's implementation components downstream. So anyway, I think it's an interesting way that even through the journey and evolution of where you've been, right, we've stayed massively complementary. when you think about the challenges that you really want to solve, right? Like, and I mean, you're one of the smartest people I know, legitimately. I mean that.
Likewise.
And I mean, the depth and breadth of the experience that you have is so great. When you think about the healthcare problems that you want to solve, right? Like, if you could pick 2 or 3 that are just like, this is what's going to make a massive difference in the world.
Wow. Well, that's a pretty heavy question. I wasn't prepared for that.
I know. I wasn't actually prepared to ask it, but let's just go for that. So,
yeah, I was like, okay, well. I think actually getting people in healthcare, I would say, first of all, everyone who works in healthcare, I would say with very, very, very few exceptions, wants to do the right thing. And they've chosen healthcare as a career path because of the great work that's being done. And we see that in cancer care providers, in pediatrics, neurosurgeons, everybody on down the line. It's really a calling. And at the same time, there are opportunities to do better work. And one of the things that we're seeing as an emerging trend is that marketing departments in general are getting asked to do more and more with less. And so it creates opportunities, again, thinking about things from a brand operations culture perspective, to reestablish what that functional brand means. Because I think today marketing as a named function means a lot more than it used to mean. I think operationally, there are a lot of opportunities to streamline the process in which the marketing function interacts with the rest of the organization. And then culturally, within a marketing group, particularly in this new hybrid work environment, how do you build an effective team when they're not all in the same location?
Right.
How do you create that connectivity between your mission as a healthcare system and treating the patients that you serve when you're not working in that same city? It's a very different thing. And of course, as a consulting firm, we've had to do that, already, but I see that happening with a lot of clients. So I think, that's one big thing about, how do we do. And in healthcare, we call it working to top a license. That applies to marketers too. How do we do our very best work to affect the greatest number of patients?
Right. This is an area that I'm really interested in because, for us, right, honestly, more outside of healthcare than inside of healthcare. And then, we work with financial services, oil, gas, energy, telecom, technology, right, like whatever, except for CPG generally. But those organizations, I find, they've got a head of marketing ops, right? They've got an entire department associated with operational efficiency in marketing, spend efficiency in marketing, right? Process improvement, those kinds of things. And even in those organizations, right, they have role and responsibility unclarity, right? They have process issues. They have technology needs and gaps, right? They have... they don't have playbooks for how they do mergers and acquisitions from a marketer's perspective, right? They don't generally know how to set up that internal agency or manage centrally what is a decentralized execution of a program. Right. So anyway, I say all of that as context to say that when we start bringing these concepts into healthcare, right, in all truth, there are organizations that get it and there are organizations that don't, right? So when you talk about it, right, and you start saying this is something that you'd really like to solve, how do you help people along that journey?
Yeah, so that's a great question too. I think there are a couple of tools. So as a consultant, we have a toolkit. I mean, that's basically what I think a consultant's principal role is, helping to frame problems a little bit differently. In addition to that, there are things that are transformative that we see more frequently than our clients do. So even the examples that you mentioned, these are things that clients don't go through all the time and certainly shouldn't, because once you embark on that pathway, change it once and have it fixed and give it some stability to stick. And so those tools are things like, purpose placemat, defining on paper what your purpose is as a function, setting up a run the business, change the business agenda. I was having a conversation with one of your colleagues earlier today, and inevitably a lot of marketing leaders are just inundated with requests of tasks to do, and so they're caught up in run the business. And a lot of the times what we do is we go in and help separate out, okay, are there things that you're doing today that you want to change? Let's put that on a change agenda.
Totally.
And then let's actually have separate conversations about making those changes. And so sometimes that's cultural changes. Sometimes it's org design. Sometimes it's related to the MarTech stack. So we want to be positioned as, a problem solver or as a strategic business partner. Some of those change the business things actually have to do with the conversations that you have. And so that requires people actually changing their behaviors.
Right.
So instead of going in and asking clinical service line leaders, okay, you did this last year, what do you want to do next year?
Yeah.
You're literally taking orders, asking them, what are your goals for growth? Yeah. How do I help you achieve those? And if they don't know the answer to that, which many of them won't know, well, I can help you as your business partner figure out what's possible.
Yeah. The doing more for less element I would kind of want to pull out, because I think it's such a missed area for people to really be able to quantify what is the business case for change, right? Around, okay, we've identified all of these things. And I don't find that, a lot of our clients don't know what their issues are.
Right.
It's not like, we need to come in as this, like, I'm smarter than you kind of a thing.
Exactly right.
I can identify, does that happen? Yeah, there are areas where that happens, right? And most of the time it's like, look, I know I have this challenge. I may not necessarily know how to fix it, or more often than not, I just don't have the time or the people or the resources or the process or the structure, the analytics or whatever to fix it, right? The other thing I don't have is money to spend on fixing it. Right. And so, what I find is that, helping people really understand what is the challenge, how can I actually quantify not just the, what is the benefit of redirecting things towards something else, right? But what is also the operational efficiency that can be gained by doing things differently tomorrow than I do them today, right? All that drives a business case that says, look, here's what we're leaving on the table, either from an opportunity cost perspective, a market possibility perspective, or an operational efficiency perspective. Yeah. And how do we bring that into a business case and actually gain the benefit of funding? So I am leading to a question in this. And the question is, because I think that's a very powerful activity for people to do. Where I find people having a challenge in health systems is potentially a perception that, why is marketing bringing that stuff to me like that, right? And what is marketing's role, right, within a health system? And I know that that's an area that you've spent time working with people around.
Sure.
So how do you help people get over those barriers?
Yeah, and there's a few different ways. So one of the things, and my colleague Peter Miller presented on this with a panel about benchmarking budgets. So where are you spending money relative to your competition or to peers around the country? So we work with SHSMD. We have the By the Numbers benchmarking study, which gives you that type of data. So there's a data part to it, and which is functional, right? But just like patience, there's an emotional side to it as well.
Yeah.
And so how do we build that case for change? And often that's about restating the purpose in an inspiring way. So it's not, marketing isn't the organization that creates stuff. We actually drive things. As a marketing organization, we're driving growth, which has different implications. It means that I am going to put people in a position to actually have an informed conversation with you.
Yep.
I think the other thing that you brought up that I think BrandActive does very well is vendor rationalization. Because if you're in a run the business mode, then, okay, whatever money I have to spend, I'm just going to start adding more people to it. And sometimes the only way I can add people is by adding more vendors. And I can tell you, when we come in and do an assessment of an organization, we look at the vendor ecosystem. And we do it at a high level. BrandActive, you guys do an amazing job of looking at very specific expenditures and how processes flow through and are able to streamline it all. But just looking at it at the macro level, what we find clearly is that there may be too many. And so who manages all those relationships?
Right.
You're pulling from your most talented people to deal with 3 different agencies doing 3 different tasks, those types of things, different research providers, different, media buying companies. And then how do you, someone's got to consolidate all of that into some richness to make decisions, and who does all of that? And so streamlining that, but probably the more important thing is actually having role clarity amongst your vendors.
Yeah.
And so what we see is, and of course, as consultants, we put everything in a 2x2. So we see a 2x2 where there's like a tactical tier of people that just do stuff.
Yeah.
And some of that's your internal team, and some of it's external. Great.
Necessary function.
Exactly.
Great.
And you're not asking them to be strategic thinkers about things, but you can bundle tasks and have them do that. The strategic part, though, is really around, do you have actually a thought partner? Do you have someone who's thinking about where you as a leader and where your organization is going in 5 years? And what we see often is that most organizations we initially work with don't actually have that partner. And then we have the experience with them, and they're like, wow, you guys are actually helping us solve anticipated problems. And then another thing I would share about that too is the role of a consultant. Sometimes our role is the messenger. And so I often have conversations with clients, like you said, we're not necessarily telling clients things they didn't already know. We're helping them to repackage it.
Right.
And sometimes we're helping...
Tell the story, for sure.
Tell the story, what's the narrative and who do we need to convince? And then the other piece is sometimes we're the messenger to take the slings and arrows. And so it's like, I tell my team all the time, we're sometimes put in a position, this is what we get paid to do, to take those slings and arrows to support the clients. It's not.
No.
And, sometimes, and it's frustrating to some clients too, where it's like, well, that was our idea. I've been telling the CEO the same thing you've said for the last 3 years. And I said, I'm sorry it works out this way. Sometimes it does, that you need the perceived objective person coming in.
Totally.
But as long as we're aligned on what the solution is, it's a win.
Yeah.
And always I will be, have your interest in mind. So I think as a firm, as Endeavor, we've grown because we're not the firm who comes in and says, well, because Endeavor said this, we'll rebrand presentations for the client.
One of my favorite quotes is, there is no limit to what we can achieve if we don't care who gets the credit.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
Because I just think it's absolutely true.
And we don't have to live with the decisions afterwards. That's the luxury of being on this side, is that, once we're done with an assignment, we move on to the next one with the same client, hopefully. But they have to live with the decisions and the implementation of those things. And so it's important too, as consultants, to recognize that the consequences of making tough decisions aren't things we necessarily have to live with. And so sometimes clients don't always take 100% of the recommendations we make.
Certainly not. No.
And that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, tactical question. Oil, gas, and energy, healthcare, we've been involved in some very serious brand architecture changes in both of those fields together. And I was at Siegel & Gale for a while before I joined BrandActive. I've been on the agency side. I'm going to call out technology, oil, gas, energy, healthcare, very complex brand architecture industries, right? Why is that such a difficult challenge?
Well, it's not functional, it's emotional.
Okay.
And I would say that a lot has to do with perceived brand equity. And so I think people, and I have this we have a Return Strategy, our own creative, internal creative agency. They do amazing work. And I had this circumstance with a client where the boring part of brand, no one wants to really care about. It's like, let's get excited. Our
business, by the way.
Exactly, right? And so it's like, hey, let's get excited about the big idea and everything else. And oh, by the way, how are we actually going to implement it, which is what BrandActive does. But then how do we translate it through all the variety of touch points in the entities? And so what we work is on the rational side of branding, which is what are the implications now to changing all these names? Now, what's helpful to us in our background is understanding change management.
Right.
And so aside from just let's move deck chairs around, it's actually understanding what are the consequences of change. So the way that we work together, which I think is a very strong partnership, is that you look at cost of change from an economic standpoint. We look at it from a behavioral and cultural standpoint.
Right.
So what I want, and so why I say brand equity, it's usually the lightning rod issue, because a lot of the resistance we get to making those changes has to do with the will of the organization in general. And it's not just an individual leader who has to do this to make the changes necessary, because we're dealing with someone's identity or what they perceive to be their identity.
Totally.
And so sometimes that's an entirely new name. Sometimes it's borrowing the name of the acquired company. And so it's like, well, wait, you're taking away what I've identified myself with. And unless we make the case for change strong enough that it is a net positive and here's what's in it for you, then that resistance can perpetuate. And that becomes a symbol of, of the fear of change, and then becomes a symbol of, resentment over a period of time. It's like, well, yeah, so-and-so came in and they changed everything.
Right.
We kind of see this kind of, not to be able to speak about clients. So let's look at Continental Airlines and United.
Right.
Long time ago that happened, everything changed to United, and they try to, we'll take the Continental globe and make it part of the symbolism.
And the blue
but at the same time, it was like, well, maybe the case for change wasn't made strongly enough, and some of the cultural mechanisms that were in place that made Continental, and being Houston-based, big Continental fan, it became United. And that shift was very difficult because the change management of it may not have been executed as well as it could have been.
Right.
We see the same types of thing in energy and healthcare, where it's, you know what, people have affinity towards their brands. And that is their house. You know, so they drive up one day and you see their house name changed.
Potentially.
Exactly. They may be the founder.
Yeah.
And so if they drive up one day and it's changed and you didn't tell them why, there's a problem.
Yeah.
You know, and it creates a lot of unnecessary conversations that might have been avoided otherwise. So
I kind of want to go, because to me there's sort of layers to that conversation, right? And I find that a lot of people focus on the top of the house side of that, which I don't in any way want to interject my opinion on this, right? But I do think that
go ahead. What is it?
Well, but it's very obvious that, like, okay, I am a health system coming together. I have hospital names, right? You know, I have the system name, right? Okay, I need to focus my attention on those big things, right? And then as you start looking down the architecture, and this is where I find a lot of agency partners, and this isn't a criticism of them. It's look, that's where people have asked you to focus, and that's where the focus is, right? But then you get down into the levels of, okay, what about outpatient practices? What about actual clinical names? What about the practices that sit within that clinic from a doctor? Like, when you start going down the levels, right, this is where I actually find more of the resistance actually happens opposed to at the top level. And am I right in?
You're right.
I'm not actually the one doing that work. So
you're right. I would say that there is, the primary branding makes a difference because it is the biggest signal of change. But then once it gets real is when we actually change what I see every day. And actually the parallel to on the consumer side is similar. So one of the constructs that we use is that as we go through the experience of a consumer, the branding actually gets more specific. And if you think about it, it's like, okay, there's a lot of leverage to be made if we have one primary brand through our website and through the commercials, any one-to-many communications. Even with referring physicians, they don't necessarily need to be branded specific to an entity. However, once I start going through scheduling and once I start receiving treatment and once I'm in my car driving around, I really do need to understand where I'm going and what makes this area distinct from another. And so that's the general construct. But the same is true for employees. And so as I get more specific to who I am and who I identify with, that takes on a role. I think one of the myths in healthcare is that brand equity is the answer. And it is, by even researching it, and while we do this type of research, I would say too that what research will show consistently is that as you get more specific, you get more individual, and it becomes a one-on-one type of interaction. So Dr. Smith isn't changing his name. Dr. Smith will be the same person. The entity in which Dr. Smith works may change. It may become medical group or something more generic. But will that actually affect the relationship between me as a patient and Dr. Smith? I don't think so.
Right. Okay. Shifting gears.
Yeah.
You have a talk tomorrow.
Yes.
It's on AI.
Yeah.
All right. I know you're using AI. You mentioned actually the organization within Endeavor that you've created.
Yeah.
I know you're using it in your work right now. What do you want people to know?
Wow. Well, it's fast moving.
Yeah,
that's number one. Honestly. And I think from a posturing perspective, as a company, we've taken a position that we will use it. We will embrace it within guardrails. And so part of those guardrails has to do with, unless we know where the information is going, we need to be very careful about what it is we share. And so we have actually established some policies, but they continuously evolve because the technology does. But generally speaking, from my perspective, what's safe is things that don't get shared with the systems. So even with something like ChatGPT, we have a corporate license that doesn't teach the rest of the world what we're asking it. But even in those contexts, we don't share client information, but we do use it to accelerate business development. And so my BD team, they'll actually create playbooks. We're attending the SHSMD conference, who's attending, who are the people that Endeavor should approach, what are the types of things we should be prepared to talk to them about. And then what's so fascinating is that as we use our own corporate license, it begins to learn more about the types of approaches that we're making, and it becomes more educated. So I would say those are things from a content development
No other
perspective.
agency is watching this and taking these ideas.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. But then the other side, so the return strategy side, what they've been doing is to actually create creative output. And so as an organization, we've actually launched the first completely AI-generated marketing campaign in the energy industry. So it came up with the themes, it came up with the illustration through this trial and error, and the experimentation that's required. And it does take it, because if you can imagine, and of course I'm not the creative director, and our chief creative officer always tells me stay in your lane, which is great. It's always, it's playful.
Yeah.
But it's when you create something, you're creating it in code. Mm-hmm. And so how do you alter an image that you've created with code? Well, you actually have to learn how to recode it. Right. And you actually have to educate the tool to actually do that. And so whether it's video or illustrations or any type of imagery, that's the learning curve. Mm-hmm. How do we translate our ideas into words and into language, as opposed to just moving your brush around on Illustrator or whatever they do? Yeah. So that part is fascinating. On the content side, it's getting very smart in query. Yeah. And so it is, while it's conversational in nature, it's just like this interview, you get out what you put in terms of the questions.
Totally.
And so having smarter queries actually makes the machine smarter, and then therefore the output better, and being able to evaluate it. One of the interesting things, this is another secret I'll share, is when we stumbled upon this was that, let's just say, to keep it generic, we're hiring a lot of people. Right. And so, I can search through Teams. I need to find a job description, and LinkedIn will give me some, parameters, whatever. Or I can go to our tool and say, create a job description for a market research analyst. Mm-hmm. What we found that was very interesting is I can get it to evaluate its own work.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
And then I can ask it to improve itself.
Same. Why
did you give me an 8 out of 10? Give me a 9 or a 10 out of 10. And then what did you do to make it better? Mm-hmm. So I made it more succinct. I actually reviewed your website, and I said, these are the things that Endeavor stands for, and I incorporated it. Great. Yeah. Now it ostensibly learns that, and the next one I get should be a 9 out of 10 each time.
So we've talked a lot about sort of the evolution of, the business. One of the unique things that I thought you did, that I didn't expect you to do, was actually the acquisition of Return, and getting more into the creative and events and digital enablement sort of space. Anyway, I'll let you talk about it.
So we had an opportunity to actually acquire Return during COVID. Mm-hmm. And so Ryan Nash is someone that I had the privilege of working with in the past, and he and his co-founder, Rich Thomas, who's our chief creative officer now, founded Return Strategy. And I think he will tell the story better than I, but basically right as they were about to sign a new lease, COVID hit. Uh-huh. And so they were in panic mode. And of course, one of the attractive things about Return Strategy is that they actually made their claim to fame on video games. Mm-hmm. So very big in entertainment and gaming. And so as I like to tell the story, Ryan and I will co-present at some of these healthcare conferences, and I come in as the old guard, and which is hard to believe, but 26 years into this, and
true, John. That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, right. And now here's this other guy, and he's talking about video games and their application, and there's so many into healthcare, particularly from access to creative talent in LA that we now have, and trying to change the game in the sea of sameness. But Ryan individually was responsible for launching Fortnite. Mm. So, we have this joint presentation. Yeah, whatever, right?
Nobody plays that game anyway.
No, especially not now. Yeah. And then so he shares that story, and we're at the end of this particular conference, and hands go up in the audience. And so, okay, I got this. I get asked questions all the time, right? And no, they're all for Ryan. Right. And actually, not only are they not questions solely about Fortnite, but they're actually requests to take pictures with them to send their kids. And so I'm like, okay, clearly I've been outclassed and overshadowed in all of this. So, but that's some of the energy that comes with bringing on the team at Return. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we've been able to do now is, as we go through the work that we do with BrandActive and helping organizations envision their future state and creating plans, it had been the case as any management consulting firm that our work kind of stopped at the plan. Mm-hmm. And it was like, okay, here you go, here's the plan. But now with Return and access to that creative talent, we can loop them in at the beginning of the process. So we're able to do things in terms of even envisioning what the future state is with that access to that creative talent, and getting peer space in different markets and actually facilitating cooler events around that. And then with them involved in the planning, coming up with things that are much more, I guess, engaging and moving our healthcare clients in particular past their traditional comfort zones.
Totally. You're bringing in ideas from the gaming space, from the event space.
Exactly.
I've seen some of them, right? And they're wildly different than anything you've seen.
That's
in healthcare
right.
before. So.
Yeah, and then of course there's always a balance. So healthcare, by its nature, particularly in the work that we do with academic medicine, is conservative. And so how do we take them to push beyond their boundaries in their thinking, but maybe be more pragmatic in their execution?
Right.
But they've at least pushed the boundaries, got them to see what's possible. And we've had some great experiences recently where we've launched national ad campaigns where part of the balance that I have to strike with our creative team is, well, they didn't take your big, bold idea, but they took the next best thing to it, and even that was big progress. Yeah. And we still have the next big, bold thing on the horizon. Right. And so it's change management.
To them, it was big and bold. So.
Exactly. And so that transcends into our thinking about things like physician relations, sales enablement, and coming up with different ways for physician liaisons to interact with physicians that they may not have thought of before, beyond Salesforce.com, but what's a sales enablement tool need to look like? Right. Call centers. We do a lot of work in call center call center operations. And so what does the call center agent of the future need to look like, particularly in a distributed work environment? Mm-hmm. And then how do we actually engage them in cool and creative ways and effective ways that would be somewhat risky for a healthcare organization to do, but having the confidence that Activision does it this way makes it a lot more easy to swallow.
That's great. I think, content development, creative development, stuff like that, that's been sort of the topic on AI and the marketing space for a long time. I think what's really interesting is the application in business development, the application even for us and our work around analytics.
Yeah.
What you're doing with the unit that you've created.
Yeah,
right?
Correlate IQ. Yeah, and I think too, it's
I forgot the name of it.
No, it's a brand new thing. Actually, as of last week, we named it. So we may need some help in terms of where we put those branded assets. And so I think there too, it's the new frontier, which is exciting. And as I think about, you asked me early on, where can we make a big impact? And I think this is another area too. Yeah. Where this entity, Endeavor Analytics, was founded was based on social determinants of health data. Mm-hmm. And so while we have a commercial interest in terms of helping organizations, particularly marketing and physician relations departments, grow revenue, part of this is actually looking at things from an equity standpoint. Mm-hmm. So how do we do this in the most equitable way? And how do we actually show that what activities are taking place, whether it be marketing or physician relations or even clinical activities, are actually making a difference? Mm-hmm. The challenge that we have in healthcare is that we have disparate data sources. And until there's a commitment amongst the healthcare systems to actually start to share genericized data, it makes it very difficult. And so what Correlate IQ is founded on is the ability to make that process a lot easier. Yeah. And using Amazon Web Services and their partnership, which is amazing, really helps to create a platform where that can happen. And then, of course, using, statistical techniques like correlation, but and also using AI, we can actually draw some inferences to understand what the relationship between different components of the healthcare experience and data are.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to seeing how this aspect of things is empowered by the 25 years of work that you've done on all the foundational elements of what it takes to actually make that useful.
And that's the cool part. I mean, I've had a great experience working with our partners at the Center for Health Affairs and our executive director, Orlando Alvarez, who was former chief strategy officer at Cleveland Clinic, Florida, a number of other places, and also bringing together our executives and residents and helping them, asking them to help us really frame all of this. Yeah. So what are the different pieces that we can actually put together? Mm-hmm. And so that's part of the product development. And I think like our work with the benchmarking, we also are creating things that are built for and by healthcare leaders. So instead of me just coming to the table and saying, well, John thinks this is such a brilliant idea, I'm going to convince you that it is, going there with, here's the platform, here are some initial thoughts that we have. Okay, healthcare leader, chief strategy officer, chief marketing officer, COO, what would make this even more impactful? Mm-hmm. And already we're starting to see impact in just having that type of conversation to where we're not selling a product, we're selling a platform. Yeah. We're selling an idea. For example, we talked to a major pediatric healthcare system where it was like, what we'd love to be able to show or understand is why people don't show up for their appointments. It's like, that's a perfect application for Correlate IQ because it requires a number of different pieces and it has an SDOH component to it as well. And so let us build this. Are you willing to fund it if we're unable to get more people to contribute to it? And so that funding model is also a source of innovation for us.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm excited to see where that goes. I think you've got a marketing ops summit that you're thinking about doing.
Yeah, well, we do.
Right. we do.
So we'll be working on that. So essentially the idea is, as we're engaging leaders, what we found is that many are looking for opportunities to engage their counterparts. And so we see that with physician relations leaders. Actually, we had 3 awesome clients who came to me independently and said, you know what, you work with a lot of physician relations groups. Who's my peer and how do I connect with them? I was like, well, here's their number and email, but wouldn't it be better if we just brought you all together?
Yeah.
So, and these are kind of the niche areas where I think they're the forgotten groups, because there isn't a conference specific to physician relations leaders.
No.
There's for liaisons.
And there certainly isn't for marketing operations in healthcare.
Exactly.
It's not really for marketing operations anywhere.
Exactly, right? And it's this forgotten group. The other interesting thing about marketing ops is that what we find too when we go in and do these assessments of the marketing organizations, like you've noticed, that's a group, a function, a specific bundle of tasks that's often overlooked, or it's distributed across a large number of people and very inefficient. And so it's like, well, maybe this marketing operations summit can bring together people who have tangential responsibilities for it, and they maybe only look at a piece. And it's like, well, wait, we can actually scope this in a way and create jobs out of it to where it's like, this is a role within marketing.
Exactly. That's the part that excites me the most about it. The content is one thing. Like, we can talk about technology improvement and process improvement and, organizational elevation and all of that. But for people to be able to come to something like this and say, hey, this is an area I've been really curious about, or I've wanted to know more about, or I've wanted to build the case around internally, right? But it's not my job.
Right.
And it's not my job because it's nobody's job. Right?
Yeah,
In the
that's
organization,
exactly
right? So how do I build out a structure around that and build the case and get us to hire somebody and all that? And I think that's where the combination of this can really help people.
Yeah, and so we call that process Elevate. And so basically what we've done, as you know, is combine best practice observations between the two firms and working with a variety of organizations, especially outside of healthcare, where a lot of this innovation is taking place, to come up with a construct to be able to help healthcare leaders see where they are from a functional capability perspective. And where are you on that continuum? And where do you want to be? Because there are organizations we work with that are high performance order takers, and that's where they need to be. And that's cool. It's like, hey, you know what, but do the very best you can at in that particular area. And I would classify many of the mid-size hospital, like multi-hospital systems, being that's their zone. Like, they're promotional powerhouses. They have to be extremely efficient because they don't have a lot of budget to play with, but at the same time, their impact is relatively huge. They are the voice of the hospital and healthcare system. When we get into larger systems, then it becomes more of an issue of how do we orient ourselves to be much more tightly connected to the business strategy and those objectives. And what does that really include? And so we have clients now where, marketing includes experience, it includes internal comms, it includes what else is a crazy one? The website. It includes digital strategy. And it's kind of like, well, gosh, what does marketing not include? And, but even drawing a box around that is important, and then so should we retitle marketing to something else? We actually have a client, and I love their team name, which is the growth team. It's like, that is their name. And it's like, great, that is an amazing name. They focus on physician relationship management. And they are the growth team. VP of growth is the head of their team.
Love it.
And they're like, that is awesome. It reflects their purpose. Like, this is what we do. This is what we wake up and do every day. And of course, that in and of itself connotes, well, that means in the physician relations context, it's physician outreach, which most organizations do, but also marketing, so the one-to-many stuff, events, and then also operations. So to me, it's like, well, if you're really about growth, that means conversion is key. Who's handling call center?
Well, I said that he was one of the smartest people that I've ever met. You're also one of the best people that I've ever met.
Thank you.
So,
likewise.
And here. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks so much.
Talking through all of this. we're going to spend time at the conference together.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Awesome, Philip.
Thank
Great
you
to
so
see you.
much.